While income inequality in the U.S. has increased significantly since the 1970s, I spoke with Richard Wolff, professor of economics and the founder of Democracy at Work, and I asked him what the factors are behind this rise.
Well, the major reason for the rising inequality is very simple. For over the last 30 to 40 years, the average real wage in the United States, and by real wage I mean, as economists always do, the money wage workers get adjusted for the prices they have to pay. The real wage, what you can buy with your wage, is no higher today than it was in the late 1970s. It's an astonishing fundamental fact that shapes and explains a great deal. Over the last 40 years, then, what workers get for every hour of their labor has been pretty much stagnant or stable. But at the same time, their productivity, the computers they work with, the training they get, the intensity of their work, has all been rising steadily over those 40 years. The end result is simple. What the worker gives the employer per hour of his or her work has been going up, but what the employer pays the worker for doing so has been flat. In other words, the income and wealth accumulated by employers and everyone they share it with, shareholders get dividends, big executives get high pay packages, that has all gone up, while the basic wage of the American worker has been flat. And therein lies the growing gap between those who have become much richer and everybody else who basically hasn't.
Well, why has there not been a more dramatic push or effort to increase the stagnation in wage?
Well, that's a wonderful question. It has to do with the culture and the ideology of the United States that has blocked or thwarted the kinds of demand from below that might have gotten to that result. Another factor has been the willingness and indeed the enthusiasm of the financial sector in the United States, the banks and so on, to step in and to give workers another way of raising their standard of living, even though their wages didn't go up anymore, and that's credit. So over the last 40 years, we have had an explosion in the indebtedness of the American working class, borrowing for their home, borrowing from their car, borrowing for their credit cards, and in the last 20 years, and most tragically, borrowing to send their students to college, with the result that we have become an overly indebted society, which has a whole host of very scary economic consequences.
So let's focus on the cities where there is more inequality, where you have very rich people living amongst very poor people. What are the challenges and problems that sort of dichotomy presents?
Well, there are many. It's hard to know where to start. Let's give the example of New York City. New York City has probably the greatest concentration of high-income people anywhere in the United States. Because they are high income, they need and want to have an army of servants, home servants, people who work in fitness centers, people who get them the coffee at their coffee shop in the morning, a literal army of low-paid service workers. But the problem is, as the wealthy concentrate in these core cities, and they're not many, they do what's called gentrification. They bid up the cost of buildings, of apartments, of homes, making it impossible for the very army of servants to live near where they have to work for these rich people.
Well, Richard, let's look at this army of servant comment, because isn't this where trickle-down economics comes into play? Isn't this where opportunities at the top create for opportunities lower down the economic ladder because there's a need for those services?
It only creates opportunities if you haven't got a population that is so large relative to demand. So we have, in fact, that situation, which means what is a glaring contradiction to the extraordinary wealth of the very
few. Inequality be addressed without it being tantamount to wealth redistribution or socialism? What could be the solution then?
I think the problem with wealth redistribution is key in the word redistribute. You need to redistribute wealth when you have distributed it very unequally in the first place. When you produce such social tensions, such anger, such bitterness and resentment that the pressure comes to redistribute, and then the intense conflict that can explode into violence about how to do that. I think the much better way to go, and that history teaches us that this is the better way to go, is not to distribute it so unequally in the first place.